Thank you. I'm glad to be here. Well, virtually. Unfortunately, I couldn't be there physically. Um, but yeah, let's try it this way. I'll go through a couple of slides. I'll speed up the introduction slides a little bit, so that hopefully we have time at the end for questions. What I want to do is to share the journey we went through at Shell. I work in procurement. I'm responsible for our procurement processes, as well as the digitalization of that process. So let's have a look. This slide suggests I'm going to be sharing all kinds of fantastic secrets and interesting parts. Unfortunately, I don't think there's all that juicy parts here. Okay, let's take a quick look at Shell. Shell, as you probably know, we are in a transition, an energy transition, as well as a digital transformation. So there's a lot going on in the company. What I just want to highlight is we operate in well over 70 countries. We have about 45 billion of procurement spend. So we have quite a few changes we are looking at absorbing, if you will, in our process. And as we go through the next slides, we'll get to that. So the journey I want to talk about is started about 5 years ago. We were looking at an organization that had a number of systems that were old, legacy, and coming to the end of their life. We recognized that all of our staff and incoming staff was looking for a new experience in how to do procurement in a more modern, digitalized way. So we thought we can offer a better user experience. We can do this at a lower cost to the organization, and we can do this faster for the business. So those were essentially our three main goals. And what you'll find is I'll keep jumping and back and forth a little bit, certainly towards the end when we look at the lessons learned between what we set out to accomplish and what the hurdles perhaps we came across and what we landed on, with the intent to make this as practicable. As user friendly in a way as you, I think many of you are practitioners like myself. Okay, so what do we implement ourselves? I think that will help set a little bit the scene, and then we can get to the to the way we implemented this, and then we get to the lessons learned. So we implemented SAP Ariba. You may have heard of this company. So Ariba was an independent company bought by SAP. It's now, of course, part of a much larger organization. The story I'll tell, I think, will be very similar for similar products that you might use for your procurement organization. But it has a number of modules. And I think it's important to share this so that you understand the context of my experiences or our experiences. But at the same time, I think the generic learnings are, or the learnings I think are very generic, and you'll find that any digital implementation will experience similar things. So we have on the orange right top side, you'll see we use the module to create our category strategies and our sourcing strategies. In the purple area, so we push, if you will, the data in the system from one module to the next. Our staff that used to be operating in a landscape with about 20 different systems, and this was the first transformation. They are starting to operate more or less in one system. Now, being in one system doesn't necessarily mean transformation. The transformation came in that we had, because of these many systems, a way of siloing in various parts of the way we operate or operated. So our category strategies were created. They were fantastic. Unfortunately, when we created our sourcing strategies, which would be the next step in the process, a lot of our buyers didn't have access to those sourcing strategies, to those category strategies, and they would create a sourcing strategy without those category strategies. Okay, I won't go into detail of each and every one of those elements. The point is that by having things in one system, I think is a major step in accomplishing a digital transformation. We used WhatFix. I'll get to WhatFix in a little bit, but it's a digital assistant that helped us train staff what they needed to know at the point where they needed to know it. And that enabled us to give very short training at the right time where people are motivated to learn. And I think that was one of the key enablers. Now, after you create your sourcing strategy, you get it approved, which we now can do in our system, either your sourcing, your electronic or your digital sourcing, which enables us to capture what you ask the suppliers to provide a quote for, and reuse that in the future. But then also the responses you get and the pricing you get, the quotes you get, are automatically added on into your database, enabling you to benchmark across the world over multiple years and see what the market trending is. And that, of course, then feeds back into your sourcing strategy next time around, understanding the market conditions. So we use in Ariba, we use the data that you enter in the first phases, so the header data, and we use that to create your contract. So essentially the system now looks at about 50 data points. Those data points then tell the system for this contract, say we're buying pumps in the UK for this value, for this duration, and all these different elements start telling the system which clauses are needed and which clauses are not needed. So you get a very fit for purpose contract that otherwise a human would have literally cut and paste the elements into one contract, in which, of course, a lot more can go wrong, can get missed, can get overly burdensome. So I think that's another example of the system starts to grow. Now, I think the other key element here is that because the users know that the data they're entering upfront in the process is going to be used later on to generate their contract draft, their motivation to and their focus to enter correct data gets much higher, because they're going to be at the receiving end again of the same data when they need the contract draft. And I think this is one other point I'll speak a bit more about later, is that when you have data and the consumer is not the same person as who's the person entering the data, you tend to have a problem. Okay, we'll get to that later. Now, once you have create your contract, you go back and forth with your supplier, you sign the contract. We use DocuSign for that. So again, it's fully digital. Contracts are stored, again, back in the same system, which we can use that data later on to check, are we still compliant with new legislation, understand where we have made changes to our contract clauses, which will help us inform on contract content changes we want to make, our templates changes we want to make. And then the last part, of course, of the contract is, now we have a contract, and now you want to get the value out of your contract. So how can you do it best? Well, one way is to make sure that you have full access, both for your business partners have access to that, as well as, of course, as tax, legal, finance, and anybody else that has a role in managing that supplier and can track that supplier's performance over the life of the contract. And do that for all contracts, group by category, group by supplier, by country, by business, etc. We use another product for that. It's Salesforce. I mentioned earlier, we went from 20 to much fewer systems. Now, the nice thing is that all the systems I mentioned, in principle, they're all embedded into Ariba, with the exception of Salesforce. So for Salesforce, we do have to jump out and go to that tool for the post-award content management part. And then the last thing to mention, we use Azure as our CP data hub. We have multiple data hubs across Shell, so that all the data gets pulled into these specific hubs from where you can use it for further analysis or reporting. Okay, so that's what we implemented. How do we do that? And I'll use the same kind of graph to kind of like walk through the learnings on each of these elements. So perhaps rather than talking to how we implemented, I'll combine it with the learnings of how we implement it. So, first of all, of course, project management 101, get global sponsorships. Of course, we did that. Check. So we thought. We had very clear goals. There was a clear purpose. I mentioned that, great user experience, lower cost, a faster turnaround time. And most of our communication from our leaders was about, you guessed it, user experience, which is a very nice, positive story. The reality is their main focus, or big part of their focus, was how can we reduce organizational costs, both in internal cost and third-party cost. And what happened was that staff, procurement staff that in the past thought were compliant, and this is a red thread that will come back through this story. So staff who thought they were doing and fulfilling all of the requirements, the corporate requirements, to make sure that we had suppliers who were operating safely, that we had suppliers who were ethically sound, all the standards we have, and that they were meeting them. So those were kind of almost external standards. And of course, we also had some internal requirements, as in people who are authorized to sign off certain steps, that those actually had the authority when they were signing off. What we were finding out very quickly was that as our managers, as our leadership was communicating about user experience, feedback came, well, actually, now that we have this system, we have more work. I'll pause it for a moment, but you'll see it coming back in almost every of our steps here of why that is. The good thing we had was we had our senior leadership constantly supporting us in our messaging, but as I mentioned, the messaging and reality started to differ. Now, what we did have is a very clear route, a very clear point where we wanted to get us to. And that point is, and still is, a much more automated, intelligent supply chain. And I think that is important because you won't get there in one step, you'll get there in multiple steps. And every time you add a step, staff will get more confidence that actually we're getting to that space where we want to get to, and where they can see the bigger benefits to themselves. Because in the end, I think that's what most of us are looking for. What is in it for me, right? Oh, sorry. Okay, so then we got to, in the project, we got to the point of, we've got the senior leadership, we got to design and redesign our process. So, as I mentioned, my team is also responsible for the procurement standards and requirements in Shell. So we knew exactly what the standards were. We were also looking to empower our staff, so let them make more decisions themselves, while still staying within the policies of the organization. But then, of course, it started to bite a bit here with making sure that they are within the policies. So the good thing of having a digital system was that we can actually see what people are doing. I mentioned earlier, staff started to complain that they needed to do more. So we use the data to actually see what they were doing more. And according to our data, in most instances, we didn't see them doing things they were not supposed to do or not needing to do. So we decided to have interviews with all of our staff. And I know I'm jumping a little bit ahead here, but and in those interviews, staff were talking about the things that they thought they had not needed to do were actually things they did need to do in the past. So I don't know whether it's a good or a bad thing. So we realized we were not as good as we thought we were in the past, but at least we knew that was going on. Now, during the process, redesign and designing our Ariba system, we used the IT, so procurement was in the lead. We had the IT department to help us from a technical side. We had, of course, the supplier helping us also from a technical side. We brought in quite a few end users representing their business or their function. And working through specific user journeys or journey maps, we can look at how how the existing requirements really worked in practice. And that already streamlined a lot of the processes, although we did not challenge the requirements themselves, as I mentioned. We saw that it was an iterative process, meaning we would design the process, and once you'd done that, we kind of like went back and did it a number of times until it was really, we couldn't find any waste in that process anymore. Now, we tested, and I'll get to the testing part a little bit in a moment, but as we started to test the process, we started to hear more and more users talk about, yeah, but I never did this, or I never had to do this. And that's when we realized that there was a difference between what we expected people to do and what people were really doing. And of course, you wonder, okay, well, if people didn't do certain things or for certain thresholds, could we then perhaps optimize the system further and reduce certain requirements in certain instances? So I think the data started to tell us that we were asking people to do things that were not adding value in certain instances. So for certain countries, perhaps certain requirements were not as necessary, or for certain values of contracts, certain things were necessary. Okay. In the testing phase, we realized, or actually we planned, that our testers were also going to be our trainers afterwards. So we had a plan to have at our larger sites trainers do, and this sounds terribly old-fashioned after we just came through the whole COVID period, but have classroom type training sessions. So yes, staff was going to be set down, and we wanted to train them. So as part of the training, as part of the testing cycles, we had the same people doing testing as that were going to be later on doing the training. So they can already experience the system, trip where most people are going to trip. Now, what we didn't do very well is we didn't define the success and failure criteria of the testing. So we were testing, and certain things went well, certain things didn't go well, but we struggled at one point to really determine, is this good enough? Are we ready to go live? So really defining in advance what your criteria are of when should you go to the next phase, when is the testing enough? And that is not just, is the system up and running, but are users comfortable enough? Are users saying that the way to work and the system and the requirements is what they expect? That's also really important to keep your global sponsorship, as I started off with, on board. Because if your sponsors expect that your end users are going to be happy and they're not, and you met your testing requirements, you're going to go forward with your implementation, your communication starts to break down, and your support from your leadership starts to break down. Okay, so we got to the training. So we did the very old-fashioned one big bang. We had classroom training sessions where we set people down for 2 days, and we showed them from start to finish how to do their job, the new job, or the job in a new way, in an integrated digital environment. So this was not just the procurement staff, but also our tax, legal, finance, everybody they were working with in the past, but they were using SharePoint, Outlook, and about 20 different tools to do that job. And now it was all coming together. Now, what we learned there was that doesn't really work because, of course, on hindsight, 2020, staff can only focus for so long. They can see for 2 days all the use cases, all the steps they had to go through. They would go back home, or they would go back to their regular job, and they would not have to create a contract for X number of days or weeks. And then they had to remember, what was it again that I saw 2 weeks ago or 2 months ago? And how do I do this again? And initially, we did not have a digital assistant. So there's a number of digital assistants. We use WhatFix, and I must say that was a game changer for us. Having in your tool a digital assistant that will help your users as they learn, and not only learn, but also be coached or guided or corrected when they see something new or do something new or do something that's perhaps not what they should be doing. And I'll get to that in a little bit. Having a digital assistant to correct them there and help them there was absolutely essential. So for us, no more big bangs and no more big classroom training sessions. And as I mentioned, the trainers that we use later on became our support network. So the big bang, it made a lot of sense. Technically, I don't think we could have done it differently, because I think once your landscape of users is so intertwined that you can't really carve out a part of the process to say have a go live, and then 2 months later or a month later to have the next part go live. We didn't really see how we could do that. Maybe there was a core you could go live with and add on more and more functionality, which effectively we did afterwards, but we went live with the functionality we had in the other system, the other 20 systems at the go live. And then later on, we started to build functionality on top of that. I'll get to that a little bit from a CI perspective. Then from an adoption and embedment perspective, so I think this is where it gets interesting. So now that you have people operating in a system and you get all the data of what they're doing, so you can see who's doing what, how long does it take, why are they skipping certain steps, where are they getting stuck in certain steps. We started to, we created a league table or league tables for key parts of the process we cared about. So we started to show our say, second tier leaders how they were doing or how their staff was doing relative to the others. So initially, first time around, it was anonymous, right? A, B, C, D, and this is how they were doing. So hey, team A, they're doing all of the e-sourcing in the system now, 80, 90% after first month, great. And then team B, you're only at 12%. Now, of course, you can imagine that doesn't do a whole lot yet, but people started to ask, can I get a report of that, but actually with my name where I'm at? Sure. So we started to do that. And that was for the brave ones to really, the real leaders, right? And so we did after 2-3 months, we started to see and we started to show the trend of how the league tables helping to influence that some leaders are really driving adoption in the organization, and we just started to see them, turn green across the table, right? Their e-sourcing, their the e-signature use, all the steps, all the key steps we cared about in the system, whereas other teams did not. Now, what we did, and I think this was one of the smarter things we did, we made sure that our leaders could tell any of their team leaders, if you have a low percentage of adoption of usage of the system, but all your peers are scoring 90+%, you can't make the argument that it doesn't work, or that it's not fit for purpose. So from a perspective of how do you get adoption, I'm not saying it's the most subtle way, but it was a very effective way. And we still use that when we roll out new technology or new functionality. We still do that. Now, of course, we also use, maybe that was a type of a nudge, but what we use the nudges and such for are specific steps in the process. So we make it very easy to do the right thing, and we make it harder and harder to do the wrong things, or to do the right thing the wrong way. And there's many, many spots where we did that. I mentioned earlier the WhatFix tool, the digital assistant. So it can pop up, right? It can tell you, hey, you selected this value and that value. The combination of those two is kind of strange. Are you sure you want to do this? No, it's a sludge, making it a little bit harder, or it's a nudge to make it a little bit easier to do the right thing. Okay. One of the things that was really disappointing is that the way we rolled out, we were very focused internally on our procurement organization, procurement staff, and not as much on our business partners. So in the end, our procurement tool that was meant to really be a tool to collaborate with our stakeholders with became a procurement tool. So yes, it was procurement and the procurement support teams, if you will, now all collaborate in this, but not as much the business partners. So we missed a huge stakeholder group in our communication, unfortunately. Yeah. And I'll get to the last part here. We can hopefully turn over to some Q&A. So the continuous improvement. So I mentioned the process mining. So we used that after about 2 years. And I think there were two parts. So one part was, where are staff, where are people not doing what they should be doing? But there's also a part of, where are people doing things that we don't think they should be doing? Because that's waste, right? So we had interviews with them, and in most instances, indeed, it was waste, and we could just stop those things. And it told us that there was a need for more training, more information for them, so they would feel more comfortable, because they have a lot more empowerment, so they would be more comfortable taking those decisions. So we beefed up our digital assistant. Now, on the part where staff were not doing what they were supposed to do, we kind of went back and forth on how many controls we put in the system. So initially we'd rolled it out, and literally it was stage gates. And if you did not finish everything you had to do in stage gates 1, you could go to 2 or 3 or 4. Well, that didn't work. So feedback from users was pretty poor, because in practice, they very often did things in parallel. So we had taken out a lot of those hard stops, and we kind of, based on the data, we saw, hey, if we put a stop at the end of the process, if you want to sign your contract, that's fine. We can have the system look back, and did you do everything that we really care about at some point, and did you complete those things in the right way? And then we looked at users who were, or supporting staff, think of tax and legal, finance, ethics, compliance, that needed to review certain elements in certain scenarios. And how long does it take? And we primarily looked at outliers. So where did something happen very, very fast, like something should take 2 days and it was done within 2 minutes? Or where does something that should happen 2 days take 6 months? And then intervene there. So we managed to reduce our cycle time by more than 25%, and cut waste, cut effort by a similar percentage, and free up staff to do more value add activities. Now, if I go to the adding more functionality, so we had another basis, we had a platform everybody's working in, it's one end-to-end workflow. It creates the data we need. Now we want to use artificial intelligence. What I've been experiencing over the last 4 years, myself included, but certainly my stakeholders, we expect an Amazon experience or a Google experience. So unfortunately, that kind of AI, to my knowledge, is not yet available for us. So we get to do with AI, or especially natural language processing, version of AI that is not as sophisticated as what these larger companies have developed for themselves and not make it available in the market. So it still requires a lot of learning, us teaching, us setting the conditions for the machine. But I think we're getting closer. I think that in the coming year, we will be able to have AI that can actually write contracts under certain scenarios automatically for our staff. I'm looking at the clock. I'll take one more minute and then I'll turn over for some Q&A if there's any for that. I mentioned earlier, and I just want to highlight it again, data creators. So if staff are entering data, but they're not the ones consuming later on that data, chances are they're going to not create the data or enter the data correctly, because it doesn't really matter whether they enter data correctly or not. So finding ways to make sure that either they see the point of entering data, even if they're going to be consumers of the data, or try to re-embed that same data they enter into their workflow later on, so they benefit from it themselves. Let me pause there. Let me stop there and hand it over for Q&A. Any questions?